Great to have you. We'll make sure you have the mics. Great. So just going down the row, if you would, please introduce yourself, your company, and then what you view as greening the Midwest grid.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Dwayne Pickett, Vice President of Clean Hydrogen Market Development for Constellation. What is Constellation? Well, Constellation is the largest clean energy provider in the country. We own half the country's nuclear plants. We own 6 of those nuclear plants here in Illinois. When the conversation earlier today was about let's get to 30% clean by 2030, or 90% the way there because of our nuclear plants. Um, so that's really what we do, and what I want to do is to use some of that nuclear power to make some clean hydrogen to change the world a little bit. So when we talk about reaching high, we might be reaching pretty high. Um, but I didn't want to introduce myself without acknowledging a ton of people in the room who've helped me in my career get to where I'm at. And I see Commissioner Zalewski in the back and Commissioner Carrie Zalewski. Just wanted to acknowledge that the togetherness that's in this room helps us achieve the things that we want to achieve. So I'll pass it to Carrie.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Dwayne. Good to be here with you as well. HG and Jason, thank you for the invitation. This is such a great forum, the best view, I think, in the world. I'm from Chicago, so I'm always partial to the city, especially in the summer. So, Carrie Zalewski, and I've been spending about 20 years of my career thinking about how we green the grid in the Midwest. I first started as an environmental regulator where I worked on air emissions for our coal fleet in Illinois. And then I shifted over to the Illinois Commerce Commission with Commissioner Oliva, where we implemented the first round of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And now that work is in the able hands of Chair Scott. And then now I am the Vice President of Markets and Transmission at an organization called the American Clean Power Association. American Clean Power Association, or ACP, is the largest clean energy trade organization in the nation. We represent all types of technologies: wind, solar, storage, hydrogen, transmission, the technologies that support and connect all these things. So we really believe in this big tent approach. We don't try to push out certain types of resources. Rather, we try to remove barriers so there's a level playing field for these clean energy resources. You asked a question about what my vision is and my work is in cleaning the grid. I think that all of the resources, these renewable resources and other resources like hydrogen, all have strengths and weaknesses. Same thing with fossil types. But we need to figure out a way to let the benefits shine together in concert so that we really can achieve our goal of a fully decarbonized grid.
Thank you. Mike Rutkowski with 1898 and Co. We are the business and technology consulting group within Burns and McDonnell. So our name goes back, as Mike Folta mentioned, to the founding of Burns and McDonnell over 125 years ago. And the spin on that is we bring all of that knowledge to the forefront and actually planning, making investment decisions, and optimizing the use and managing the risks of critical infrastructure. So energy, and other critical infrastructure sectors. Um, I've been in the business for 35 years now. Started my career with GE, crawling around power plants, working on traditional fossil nuclear generation, and seen a lot of changes in that time. I think, the first 30 years of that career, it's been incremental changes, and now we're clearly going through an inflection point. So when I was asked to do this panel, Greening the Midwest Grid, my first question is, what do we mean by grid? I mean, we oftentimes associate that with the electric transmission and distribution system. And what do we mean by green? And I wanted to clarify both of those points. So, really, greening, we're talking about anything that leads to economy wide decarbonization. So, the whole array of energy technologies that contribute to carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and what can we do in terms of the infrastructure, the entire grid that includes the electric system, the natural gas pipeline system, our liquid fuel system, other emerging energy carriers like hydrogen, biofuels, and new infrastructure that's going to be needed to support decarbonization, like carbon capture and storage. So, economy wide, right now, end use energy is made up of many different types of energy carriers. Electricity is only about 22% of that. So, we always think about the electric grid and renewables. There's a bigger picture that we really need to think about. I think to Carrie's point, other technologies that'll come into the mix. At the same time, one of the mechanisms for decarbonization is electrifying and going to cleaner generation sources for electricity. And at the same time, we're having massive growth in electric demand due to new users like data centers and artificial intelligence. So it's a challenge of using all of the above while that market is growing. So a lot of new technologies are going to be needed. There's going to be a need for a lot more connection between those different systems. And a lot more intelligence required to optimize across that full system. So, a few thoughts to kind of frame the issue, and I think I'll turn it back to Tim.
Yeah, no, thank you all for providing those insights. To kick us off, Mike, you and I, when we discussed the panel, you mentioned headwinds and tailwinds. So, what do you view as some of the headwinds and tailwinds as we start to green the Midwest grid?
Yeah, I think tailwinds in terms of things moving us forward. Think of the things that are accelerating the pace. Generally, I mean, there's definitely broad support for decarbonization. In the Midwest states, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota all have policies in place for either 100% decarbonization by 2050 or sooner. The individual utilities have more aggressive goals, and that those goals are being largely supportive. We do have emerging technologies that are getting closer to commercialization. So those developments, becoming technically feasible, are happening. So things like hydrogen, other advanced forms of electricity storage, carbon capture, biofuels, to address all the sectors across the grid. So those are moving. Although when we look at what can we do in the next 5 years, that's where we start to see some of the headwinds. And in the construct of technologies, regulations, and markets, there's challenges to each of those. Those technologies and actually getting them physically built takes a long time. Uh, the first of a kind technologies are going to have challenges in getting financial backers and proving themselves out. In the regulatory space, every state has its own regulations. Every municipality has its own regulations. So getting down to local permitting to build existing technologies like solar is difficult. And then finally, in the markets, you think of the electric grid operators, MISO and PJM, having the ability to interconnect to those quickly, those queues are getting overloaded, and basically that's becoming a barrier to getting the existing technologies on the grid soon. So there's many, I guess, headwinds and tailwinds. I think in the next 5 years we see more headwinds. There is a line of sight with some tailwinds towards the 2050 goal.
Great. Thank you. And Carrie, I know you had mentioned that to go along with some of these headwinds and tailwinds, the recent FERC orders and the impact that they have as we pursue these objectives. Can you talk a little bit about how you see their role and what importance they have?
Yeah, it was a big year for FERC. Last July, they issued Order 2023, which is the interconnection order. Obviously, now there's the compliance filings now, and we're watching those closely. Um, it was a good first start. It was really low hanging fruit, but there's a lot more to be done. And FERC acknowledges this. They're having a technical conference on interconnection reform 2.0 in September, talking about what can we do next, because there's a lot of work to be done. And then 1920, which is the regional transmission planning rule that came out this spring. We're actually very optimistic and excited at ACP about this rule. Um, it's really good. It has long-term planning, looking out 20 years. It looks at 7 benefits, not just relieving congestion. It looks at things like GETS. It has an ex ante requirement for cost allocation, meaning that states can absolutely speak in and should be a part of the cost allocation process, but one state cannot be a barrier for this planning process. And I know Chair Phillips was saying this again at NARUC. He always reminds that under this order, you will never pay for something that you don't benefit from. So I always have to repeat that. So all good; those are very important orders. Very excited. However, these things are going to take a lot of time. I know we all got really excited in the clean energy space and in the transmission space about 1920. And the question asked is, great, when are we going to see the change? But we won't see some of the effects of 1920 till at least, by our calculations, 10 years. Like it's going to take a ton of time. So in one sense, we're really excited and happy. I know we have basically a new FERC. We have an actually new FERC right now. So to be determined, we obviously have an election coming up. So there's a lot of, I don't know if anyone realized there's an election. So like pulling on the thread of tailwinds and headwinds, a lot of question marks, but I am optimistic and excited that this work is being done at FERC, acknowledging there's a lot more to be done and that it will take a lot of time.
Great, thank you. And Dwayne,
Yeah.
since hydrogen is very important to you, it's a very similar question. And I know we talked about this a bit in discussing the panel. And what will it take to get hydrogen to be a part of the
Yeah.
solution?
Well, I actually want to take the question in a different direction than what we discussed. Um, I'm not a sailor, so I can't really tell headwinds from tailwinds. I'm more of a dry land guy. Like I want to be on the dry land. But I want to talk about something that I think people see as a tailwind or a headwind, but should be considered a tailwind. You need to correct me if I'm wrong about this. Um, if you can do so safely, take a look out the window and look at the highway. I think that's what highway is that, Carrie? Is that 94? Right? Is it Dan Ryan? Kind of goes straight here and then it turns a little bit, right? And if you ever anybody go west on 290 to go home to the suburbs like me, right? Sometimes it's going straight and sometimes it's turning. And you might be thinking, well, why the hell is it doing that? And I read an article in the New York Times, big piece in New York Times, and it kind of laid out how the highways got built in the city of Chicago. And part of it was they wanted to build them straight. That's the idea. Build it straight, right? And when you go down 290 at first, it's going straight. And they basically flattened everything that was there. And what was there was neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, brown neighborhoods, people, schools, churches. And if you live over there, you'll see, oh, the school is over here, but the playground for the school is on the other side of the highway, right? But then it bends in some places. Well, why the hell does it bend? Because some people had influence, had connection, and were able to convince them to turn it. I don't want to go on through this church. There's a really famous church, I think it's a Polish church, that's like at a major turn on 290, right? That's the history that we have to engage in the work that we're doing now. The work to build this stuff, the work to do hydrogen, which we'll get to, I promise. Not in this question, another question. We have to, I think people see it as a headwind because they're like, oh, I'm not guilty. I didn't build that highway, right? Someone else built it. I don't even know. It's not even a good highway anymore. It's too much traffic. You see rebar on the side of it. Like, it's not my problem. It's not your problem, but it's the reality we live in today. We have to deal with that history. And I think it can be a tailwind because what we've found is when we engage people in the work that HG does, HG engages people, the work that Hillary and DCO does, they engage people, we get more out of them, right? Than just flattening their neighborhood and building a whatever the hell. So tailwind, not headwind. Inclusion and engaging in diversity, stuff like that.
Great, thank you. And that excellent point. Excellent point. So now we want to turn it over to you, the audience, to ask questions of the panel.
You can ask about hydrogen, I'll answer it.
All right. You want to take mine? Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, great. So we're going to get in the audience for some questions. As I come to you, I need to ask the questions of the audience. Who of you had a terrifying experience in the last several hours due to the tornadoes? Did that affect your families personally? Anybody? Yeah, let's see the hands high, because we can have this conversation and think that this is not an urgent conversation, or we can acknowledge the fact that things are changing. So if you had a life-changing experience due to this tornado for your family or loved ones, raise your hand. I know someone said they were hiding in their basement, right? So just keep in mind, how does urgency play into the conversation we're having today?
If you could all speak to how the work you do and the organizations that you lead are addressing the action to not repeat the headwinds. What are you doing to prevent from making those same decisions that did not serve community well?
I'm happy to take that one because I avoided your question about hydrogen. All right. So, hydrogen, first element on the periodic table, most abundant element in the universe, right? And it's a potent energy source. We can use it in a liquid form, we can use it in a gas form, we can power stuff, right? But what does that mean? Well, if we take the one element that's the most abundant thing in our universe and use it to make power, that means that we can sustainably make enough power to do pretty much anything we want if we can do it affordably. That's a headwind. I'll get to it. So, what happens if we can make cheap, sustainable power everywhere, anywhere? Well, maybe we can solve the desalination issue. We can make clean water anywhere, everywhere, right? What happens if we can make clean water anywhere, everywhere, cheaply, affordably? Well, then we can solve the famine crisis, the agricultural crisis. We can bring food to people who haven't had it before. What happens if we do that? Then we can solve the health crisis and bring up living quality and standards. So that's just the technology and what's capable with the technology. Within our project, what we're trying to do at Constellation is we're trying to build the largest clean hydrogen production facility made by nuclear power in the history of the world, right here in Northern Illinois. Um, and we've won a grant to start to build that project. The problem is we can't actually complete this project without clarity from the federal government on a tax credit for that hydrogen. It's called the 45V regulation, which I won't get into. But the point is, we can't do it at all without that tax credit. So we got a grant, we got a project, we can make a lot of impact. It goes nowhere without the tax credit. I need to get another job title. If it doesn't go our way, that's okay. But what comes along with that, Hillary, is um, requirements and expectations with that DOE grant. In particular, the federal government's Justice 40 program, which requires that 40% of the benefits of our project accrue to disadvantaged communities in particular. We've hired a lot of people to really help us achieve those goals. Mike Cabrera in the back is working with, if you don't know Mike, you should know him. He's working with our team, introducing us to the community. We're going to be creating a community advisory committee that's made of members of the community, that's made of environmental activists, it's made of labor activists to help us set our goals, our targets, and to keep us accountable to them if we are able to do this project ever, which I hope we can. Um, yeah.
I love this question, Hillary, and I'm going to put maybe a different spin on it. To start thinking about how we bring communities with us, there's so much good news about jobs and how the manufacturing and clean energy renaissance is here. There's announcements daily about building these facilities. Great announcements in Illinois, as you know. I know Governor Pritzker is obsessed with this topic too, as I was when I was the chair of the commission. So very, very good news. And we think that is the place where we lift communities up. Jobs at all levels and all types of skills, tons of trade jobs. There's a shortage of trade jobs. And I get excited about, of course, bringing all the communities in. But when I think about Illinois and how the downstate rural area is just drying up, I think this could be the silver bullet in my mind. So I get very excited. It's happening. And then to be the segue to how we're trying to do things different in the clean energy sector, a lot of these jobs are going to red states, majority are. So I already talked about the election. We think about the election a lot at ACP. We know we have a divided Congress. We will likely have, a divided Congress, maybe flipped We may likely have a Republican president. So we need to think about in advance hedging our bets about clean energy. We don't want it to be a partisan issue, but unfortunately it tends to be. That's what I witness when I'm on the Hill talking to elected officials. Even transmission is partisan, which again, it shouldn't be. Transmission is important to save lives and economies and things like that. And so to do things different, we talk to everyone and maybe we change our talking points a little bit, but we talk about the benefits of clean energy in all parts of the country and what it brings to your community. Yes, it cleans up, environmental justice communities that have had to borne all of the pollution for decades, but it also brings jobs to your communities. And we're seeing, again, I already mentioned that we have red states that have more manufacturing facilities than any other. I think it's very interesting too. We at ACP look at who built the most clean energy in 2023. California is a strong contender, but so is Texas, so is Iowa. Those states don't have state policies like Illinois. They're being built because it's the cheapest and it's the most efficient type of resources. And the governors and local officials are seeing the jobs piece of it. So for me, that's where I get really excited when you think about the jobs created and the new opportunities for a whole new class of workers.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is a massive infrastructure transition that we're embarking on. I mean, truly, once in a lifetime opportunity, I would say, to not repeat the sins of the past and really think about that infrastructure transition in the form of how it impacts communities and leaving no community behind. So, our role in the process, I mean, we're doing the planning, the support for companies that are investing and developing that new infrastructure. So, largely utilities and developers of energy assets. We have a very robust, diverse supplier network that we partner with in accomplishing those activities. We're also representing the benefits of these projects in the local community meetings where the permitting happens, really where the rubber hits the road and where the projects get approved at the local level. So one of the things we do is support the benefit cost analysis, show the benefits of these projects that they exceed the cost, and in doing so, we can actually identify specific community groups, specific demographic areas, and how the benefits can accrue to those systems. So we're doing a lot of the support to make those arguments and make sure that we're leaving no community behind.
And I do want to quickly applaud Burns and Mac for their presence in the supplier diversity space. Any space where we're having a conversation about supplier diversity, I see Mike. Mike's there and he's engaging with folks and he's in the community. But a lot of that is driven by the partners, right? So we've got Nicor in the room, my good friend Mina, Melissa Washington in the back with ComEd, and they've done an incredible job over the course of the last decade, making it a priority, creating standards for the Burns and Macs to go out and make sure their subs are diverse. But the thing that we need to add to that conversation is who's working the jobs, right? Right? Are we doing enough? And are the folks that have the accreditation as a diverse company engaging the people in the community to work on these projects? And so that's next steps in our evolution here.
Thank you. This is excellent. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. My power was still out when I left for this event, so
Like I said, Melissa Washington from ComEd
yeah.
is.
I live in Ameren, Illinois service territory. It's my first
Okay.
outage since
Sorry,
I
Melissa.
stopped working for them. So, but all my neighbors still think I have an in to get the power restored. I don't. I wish I did. Um, I feel like you guys kind of touched on my question, so I'm gonna like segue into it. Uh, the past decade of my career has been built on creating community-based programs for the utility, and I think community organizing is key to everything in change in society. I think we were really lucky in Illinois with CEJA. Jobs are such a concrete thing that everyone can rally around. As we look to building out infrastructure and that piece of the transition, what's the next phase of community organizing to get the community involved? Is it still through that lens of jobs? Is it through like shared ownership of generation? Um, and looking at that side of it, like where do you see the key to getting communities involved in a meaningful way?
Great question.
Like at those transmission meetings to talk about jobs now, like what happens?
Excellent. And there, yeah.
We absolutely have labor brought in on the transmission questions, but um, I I'm gonna maybe answer it through a different lens. We need community engagement on the local level. Siting and permitting has already been mentioned, but this is one of the biggest barriers for the transition. If I were to name the top three, so at ACP, we have an executive board of the largest clean energy companies in the world. They come together and they're all types. They're IPPs, they're OEMs, they're all types of industry representatives. But the three biggest barriers are siting, permitting, transmission, and also trade issues, which is like a whole different ball of wax. Um, and other tariff issues that I know that Dwayne mentioned. But that siting piece, we need tons of community engagement and education when we want to build these things. Because truly, we have lines that have sat for 17 years that can't get built because developers have to go community by community to explain the need. Um, and it's interesting because there seems to be more backlash to build transmission lines than pipelines, even. That's kind of where we're at. It's really gotten we're really struggling at educating at what the need and the use of transmission lines. So I think when you talk about community engagement, yes, we need buy-in. We need to lift all communities up. We need to make sure there's accessible jobs for all types of people. But then there's also this education piece of both the folks living in the community and also the policymakers and decision makers and community and state as to why we need it and how everyone will benefit from this process.
And I'll pick up on that. My previous job before this, I worked at ComEd as director of regulatory, and we were trying to engage the community about our new plan for the distribution grid. And we had to do what we usually do, right? Wake up, set up a meeting, call it 10 o'clock or something like that. Everybody show up, and we'll do this thing, right? Well, turns out people have jobs, and they don't have time at 10 o'clock to talk to me about my whatever the hell. Um, so we're like, okay, we'll do these meetings at night. This is a shift, right? But the point to that story is meeting people where they are is kind of a cliche way to say it. What I'm trying to get to is engage people in the way that they're telling you to engage them. That's a better way to say it. So for the hydrogen project with the Mach H2 hydrogen hub, we actually aren't going to do anything on community engagement until we establish our community advisory committee. And then they're going to tell us, when do we meet? How do we meet? What do we do? What are the tools? So that we can be like, all right, you're engaged, you're involved, and now we need you, community member, to educate your neighbor, right? We're not going to tell them what hydrogen is, you are. And so that's how we're approaching it with the Mach H2 hub.
Introduce your company and you talk about hydrogen. At the end, can you say, so we can shoot for the stars? I just have been thinking
I'll
about
add
it the
that
whole
to the
time.
pitch.
Thank
Sure. Oh, stars. I get it now. I was thinking of the wine brand. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just emphasize the education and communication involved. I mean, this infrastructure transition is extremely complex. I mean, it's really even for I mean our whole company of engineers. I mean, it is hard to really fathom just how the changes are happening, why they're happening, what the impacts are going to be, and you bringing that to the local level of the average energy user, average citizen. There is definitely going to be an impact on their community. And do they understand the benefits of that? Do they understand the value? Do they understand how they can get involved? I think it's really going to require a foundation of education in terms of what all these changes are, how it's going to impact their daily lives, and how they can get involved and actually benefit their community.
We have a question over here.
Thanks. Mike Portas. I'm with Arena North America, formerly Patrick Engineering. This might not be a very fair question, but how do you think Dan would have answered, or how do you think Midwest Utilities would have answered the headwinds and the tailwinds question?
Look at who's Dan? Who's Dan? Oh. Dan Gable.
Next time I'll ask you what do you think Stan would have said?
I love Dan Gable. I don't know. I will say from my experience, right, there is a ton of folks trying to interconnect solar to the grid all at the same place on the system. Like, and this has been a problem for ComEd, and they've engaged the solar community about this. And I'm sure Dan would have had really great answers about how they're working through it. I think um, from my purview, what I would say is we need to relieve congestion on the transmission system so that these projects that Carrie's talking about can actually access their power lines and get it to people that need it. What we're doing at Constellation, what we're proposing is that we use our nuclear power plants, which right now we've got 5 gigawatts of excess power on the system most of the time. Right, today's a hot day; we might be running a little lower than that, uh, which means that we're just exporting that power elsewhere. Or what happens sometimes in shoulder months is we can't curtail nuclear, but we're telling wind and solar folks, you guys don't run because we've already split the atom and we're already running and we can't slow down, but we will pay you to not run. So sometimes we're paying these wind and solar developers to not run, and it sucks, right? So if we, for example, take some of these nuclear power plants, make clean hydrogen behind the meter, or enable data center growth here in Illinois behind the meter, that means we're relinquishing space in the transmission system. We have to relinquish our capacity injection rights, which means other people can take those capacity injection rights, site, build, develop their projects, use that transmission system. We think curtailments would go down by gigawatts if we're able to do these projects for hydrogen and data centers behind the meter. So Dan wouldn't have said that, but I did.
Another headwind is costs. Like, this stuff all costs money. I'm no longer having to decide whether these costs should be allowed. It is such a hard decision to make, but um, both on the distribution and on the transmission side, to build infrastructure costs money. And you're always sensitive to thinking about the rate of return. But the reality is with some investment, the right amount, the right type, you can save money, right? So it's getting that narrative right, getting the data to support those points right. We already know that through inflation and all types of, even the cost of some of these generation resources like the commodity of gas and the volatility has created an upward pressure on people's bills. The infrastructure will cost money with the hopes to eventually bring it down.
I'm gonna jump in real quick, just because I had a chance to talk with Dan relatively close to the panel. Yes, yes, yes. I think the greatest theme that I got from Dan was engagement and openness to solutioning. So they are very much want to hear what are some of the challenges, how can they help, what are some of the creative solutions that can be done to accomplish these. There's lots of headwinds. We're talking to many of them: cost, regulatory hurdles, etc. His predominant theme was we want to listen, we want to engage with all the stakeholders, whether it's on the interconnection side, whether it's the communities. They want to hear different solutions, different pain points, and develop solutions together and incorporate that into what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there's generally an underappreciation for the challenging situation that utilities are in. I mean, we're talking about an infrastructure, an electric T&D system that's been built over the last 120 years, was really built for a different purpose. You've got an aging infrastructure. You've got dramatically changing customer needs and increasing use of the product in different ways. And you've got increased severity and volatility and frequency of weather events. So, you think about what's happened in Houston just in the last 2 weeks with Beryl and people out of power for over a week. Think about I think the amazing job ComEd has done just in the last few days, and it's remarkable that with 10 tornadoes cited in the local area here, there wasn't more outages and more damage to the system. So keeping that balance between affordability, safety obviously is first, resiliency, reliability, and increasing demand for different uses of their product. It's extremely complicated. So I don't know. I don't know what Dan would say, but I think he would say, give us a chance here, give us the benefit of the doubt. We're changing, but we're rebuilding the plane while we're flying it, and we're heading into, heavy weather at the same time.
And I know you mentioned, Mike, remarkable that they were able to come back. I think it was also very lucky, because if 6 of the 10 tornadoes had hit different parts of this grid where we have extreme disparities in resilience and vulnerability, this could have been terrible. I mean, if you look at what happened in Houston is because it was not just the hurricane, it was the hurricane plus extreme heat that left people without power who needed dialysis, who needed oxygen. And then when they went to the hospitals were so full, they couldn't get in. There's an interview with an emergency doctor who said, this is worse than COVID right now. The, the hospitals are so full that they couldn't treat the people that needed. And this is just what can happen on any given day right now. Right? So I think that that concept of urgency for solving and improving systemic issues, which is what we're talking about, is needed systemic optimization and improvements. We've got to find our point of urgency to lean in on this. Because if we don't, we're never going to be ahead of the level of engagement we need. And the other piece on engagement, engaging stakeholders does not mean they will trust you, right? That doesn't mean they're going to trust you to make actions or trust you enough to agree to citing something in their neighborhood. That trust building is a whole nother level beyond engaging a stakeholder. And for that to happen, they have to feel that you are aligned with their win. So a shared vision of what winning looks like on these issues is extremely important to get the support of the communities that are needed. And part of that has to be addressing asymmetric suffering and vulnerabilities, because those are the very groups and communities that you need most engaged, because those are the vulnerabilities on the system that will need to be solved for first. So it's that having that whole view of how do we do that collectively will be so important. Other questions? Yes. In my steps in.
Yeah. Hi, Will Plateau with Calco Energy here. I am a sailor. I just did the race to Chicago Mackinac this past weekend, so this analogy of headwinds and tailwinds is particularly hitting. And I know though that headwinds can be a prevailing or a propelling force as much as tailwinds can, right? So as we look towards some of these headwinds or roadblocks with decarbonization and our goals in that direction, um, where do we see that if attacked correctly or at the right angle can become a prevailing force, that these roadblocks when addressed in the proper manner can be wind that propels us towards our decarbonization goals?
I want to take that one if I can. I'm going to stay away from the sailing analogies though, because you'll just eat me alive. When I think about hydrogen in particular, right, and behind the meter situations in general, I think it's an opportunity to get the best of both worlds. I think what people think about behind the meter sometimes they see, oh, you're taking something away from the grid. The word used is diverting nuclear power to some other purpose, hydrogen or data center. And it's not how the grid works, right? If you're adding load, doesn't matter. From the meter, behind the meter, we got to deal with it, right? I think the headwind that we can steer into a tailwind when it comes to hydrogen is, well, hydrogen's use. So we can use hydrogen as an energy source. We can use hydrogen to clean the production of combined cycle gas plants, which means that those peaks that we have, we talk about our 2030 goals, mostly clean now, right? That 10%, it's peakers, gas units. If those gas units run on clean hydrogen, then our peaks are clean. We're able to have that 100% clean grid that we're looking for, right? And then in terms of behind the meter data centers, for example, turning that headwind into, it's not a headwind, it's an opportunity, right? First thing is we build it here, right? This 5 gigawatts of excess capacity that we have in Illinois is really only an opportunity for us if we take advantage of it, because they're building data centers in Indiana, they're building them in Wisconsin, they're building them in Ohio, and they have no plan to serve them other than to take excess power from our grid. That's their plan, right? That's being a little too mean to those states. That's what I'm going to say here with people from Illinois. Um, and then obviously what I talked about in terms of freeing the transmission system to bring in more clean energy, right? This vision, I think, is a vision for all of the grid, peaks, new renewables, batteries. When she talked about all these things having their problems, right? Hydrogen has its problems, too expensive. Let's just take advantage of all of it and get it going and maximize the benefits, I think you said. So
And I'll just say, you ask a surgeon how to solve a problem, they're going to say you cut. When you ask someone who focuses on the markets like I do, I'm talking about the RTOs, ISO markets, um, I'll say you fix the markets. So market signals are off, and they're off for different reasons in different markets. But like, for example, I won't try to talk about hydrogen because Dwayne knows way more than I do, but long duration storage is a beautiful technology. It's being built. I mean, the Form Energy manufacturing company is already up and built. Um, there's no market signal for long duration. And we're talking about Houston being out for days. This could be the perfect solution. I know we talk about storage and it's usually looked at 4 hours. So, in response, long duration storage is being built in places like a Minnesota or a Georgia because they're being part of the IRPs within the state, their planning process. So, if our markets could send the right signal, pay for something that has both black start capacity and also can stay on for days and literally save lives, to HG's point, um, then we can really unlock and unlock all the potential of all these types of resources.
Yeah, I think those challenges do create opportunities for innovation and breakthrough. So, in the sort of the triangle of technologies and regulations and markets, I mean, all of those need to improve to make a project a reality, to make that infrastructure change happen. So, what can we do to drive costs down in the technology itself? What can we do to provide just enough of an incentive and make the interconnection queue easier and get all of those three dimensions aligning. I mean, what we're doing in terms of actually building the projects, planning the projects, is we're looking for ways to do that faster, to do that more affordably, looking at new technologies, looking at using artificial intelligence and incorporating that into our processes, and being able to make the case for investment because we're able to see a line of sight to lower costs in a shorter time frame.
one last quick benefit of hydrogen in the future that you're thinking about. Um, we don't have a lot of hydrogen now, clean hydrogen. But if we're able to build this demand, if we're able to build this market and use our resources and really unleash it, we'll be able to have a whole commodity for hydrogen where you can buy and sell and trade and all those things. What does that mean? That means if we're making hydrogen behind the meter at Constellation, but there's a price signal in markets that says, hey, we need power right now, well, then we're able to ramp down our hydrogen production and scale back up grid production at those times to meet that need on the system, right? You turn the nuclear power plant into this peaking system effectively, right? But you got to have a lot of hydrogen, right, to do that because you got to be able to have the storage to sell your storage to your customer for those hours. But that's the vision of the future.
Great. Well, thank you for your passion, all on the panel and in the audience. While we would love to keep the conversation going, I know, Dwayne, you have a plane to catch. So I do want to say thank you, Dwayne, Carrie, and Mike, for being on the panel, making yourselves available today to answer questions and being open to the audience engagement section rather than just having a scripted kind of walkthrough. I know we all kind of preferred that method, and I'm glad we were able to get that engagement. So thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you.